by saying this. Fluoridation is one of the easiest health problems that we have to end. It's the easiest one that we can end. We can end it by turning off a tap. All you need is a strong wrist, and we can turn off this unnecessary evil at the waterworks. But to turn that tap, we need political will. And to get that political will, we need masses of people informed and organized. I didn't say entertained. I hope that you will enjoy my presentation this evening. But if you go away here entertained, but not ready to take action, then it's a waste of time. So hopefully you're going to be informed and you're going to want to be organized. So, I have spent the last 17 years researching the fluoridation issue, first as a professor of chemistry, specializing in environmental chemistry and toxicology, and then the director of FAN. I'm happy to tell you that the person that got me into this 17 years ago, who twisted my arm with a cup of tea in the afternoon, my wife is here with me, Ellen Connett. And amongst other things, the other major contribution that she's made to this movement is having our son Michael. And for 7 or 8 years, Michael made our website. And then he took time off to become a lawyer. And now he's clerking for a federal law judge in Philadelphia. But he's got involved again with the Fluoride Action Network, and he revamped the website. And if you've never been to our website, thefluoridealert.org, that's Michael, that's my son. And one of the things he's done is to make this huge health database. One of the buttons you can click on is researchers. Anybody that's researching this issue, you click on researchers and you'll get to the health database. And there are about 14 tissues examined separately, fluoride in the kidney, fluoride in the brain, fluoride in the bone, and so on. All the literature is reviewed. It's linked. Many of the full articles are there. And in addition to that, he had the idea of getting many of these papers that have been written in China translated into English so that they would become available for Western researchers. And that has proved very significant. Now, after 14 years of this, I got together with 2 other scientists. We wrote this book. And one of the best decisions I think I made in 17 years was to ask James Beck, MD, PhD, a physicist from Alberta, Calgary, Alberta, and Spedding Micklem, a biologist trained at Oxford and teaching at Edinburgh University. So we have 3 retired professors, one in biology, one in chemistry, one in physics. And we wrote this book. But I cannot tell you what a wonderful contribution these other 2 made. They got the tone right. This book is understated, not overstated. Everything is documented, and they don't go into attacking. They certainly acknowledge some of the arguments, the other side, and every single argument is documented in the scientific literature. There's 80 pages of references there. And believe me, this is your protection. You know, one of the things about citizens is they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to go out in public and say something and be embarrassed. And the other side makes a special art of embarrassing people. You know, if you only knew as much as they do, you'd realize that you were stupid. That's the message that comes from these experts. But believe you me, after 2 years, they have no answer to this book. There's been no scientific response, critique of this book. So if you get attacked in public, if you're made to feel that you are a member of the Flat Earth Society, or you put on a tinfoil hat, or whatever the thing that they do to put you down, just wave this book and say, have you got a response to this book? Have you produced a written response to this? And by the way, are you prepared to debate Professor Connett? Because he will come back to New Zealand. So if you can pluck up courage and defend your position in public, he will debate you. Are you ready to debate him? Yes or no? Put up or shut up. I am I am tired. I'm very, very tired of being insulted by people who have not read the literature, who think it's enough to quote a movie made in 1964 to counteract all the science that we put on the table. The movie, of course, is Dr. Strangelove. Anyway, so the outline of my talk, I will explain that fluoridation is a poor medical practice, that it's unethical, the evidence of any benefit is very weak, there's no adequate margin of safety to protect from known health effects. Why does the New Zealand Ministry of Health continue to push fluoridation? We have to conjecture there. And better alternatives. Okay, it's a poor medical practice. Fluoridation is the only example in New Zealand of using the public water supply to deliver medicine. And why not? Well, for obvious reasons. Once you put a medicine in the water, you can't control who it goes to. It goes to babies, it goes to infants, it goes to children, it goes to the elderly, it goes to the sick. It goes to people with poor nutrition. It goes to people with poor kidney function, who in the case of fluoride can't get rid of the fluoride. And it goes to people with borderline iodine deficiency, and they're particularly vulnerable to fluoride's toxicity. Ask a pharmacist if there's any medicine in his store that he can give to anybody. Everybody. No, of course not. You can't. Then ask him if there's any medicine that you don't have to control the dose. Take as much as you want. Drink as much water as you want. It's ridiculous. Can't control who it goes to, can't control the dose. In New Zealand, it's worse. No doctor has prescribed this medication. Nobody's tracking individual response. Doctors in medical school are not trained to recognize the side effects of fluoride. No New Zealand health agency is monitoring exposure. There's no monitoring in New Zealand of the level of fluoride in people's urine, in their blood, and most particularly in their bones. By now you should have thousands and thousands of data points. You should know how much fluoride you can expect to have in your bones as a function of how many years you've been drinking fluoridated water. How many data points do you have? Zero. None. How many health studies have you got in New Zealand? Zero. This is the lousiest. First of all, it's a lousy experiment, but it's the lousiest experiment because you're not even collecting the data. Fluoride is not a nutrient. To demonstrate that a substance is a nutrient, you have to starve an animal of this substance in its diet, take it away, and then demonstrate that some disease accrues. And if no disease accrues, then it's not a nutrient. Nobody's ever demonstrated a fluoride deficiency, a disease caused by fluoride deficiency. Dental disease is not caused by lack of fluoride. Dental disease is caused by too much sugar. There's not one single biochemical process, any biological molecule, any biological reaction, any process in the body that needs fluoride. Forcing people to drink it is stupid, since they cannot identify one single thing going on in the body that needs fluoride. Fluoride is a known toxic substance, so in the contrast to the fact that they cannot identify anything that fluoride is good for, we have identified what harm it can cause. It can interfere with enzymes, inhibit enzymes, and now we know it can do much more than that. It can interfere with G proteins, the signaling mechanisms across membranes. It can cause oxidative stress. It can interfere with hydrogen bonds. It can complex with metal ions that we need and metal ions that we don't need, but get those metal ions into places that they otherwise wouldn't go. The first opponents of fluoridation in the United States were biochemists. Biochemists that had used fluoride in their experiments to poison enzymes. And they realized that this substance should go nowhere near the body's systems. 2 Nobel Prizes in enzyme chemistry opposed fluoridation. One from Sweden and one from the United States. The chemicals used are not pharmaceutical grade, as used in dental products. They come from the wet scrubbers, a spray of water, of the phosphate fertilizer industry. And these are designed to capture two toxic gases, hydrogen fluoride and silicon tetrafluoride, which for 100 years decimated the vegetation in the area of phosphate processing plants, crippled cattle, damaged the citrus groves in Florida. Once you captured this scrubbing liquor, which is a solution of hexafluorosilicic acid, what can they do with that scrubbing liquor? What can't they do with it? They can't dump it into the sea by international law. They can't dump it locally because it's far too concentrated. It would cost an arm and a leg to get rid of it as a hazardous waste. But we have this vagary in hazardous waste regulations that if someone buys a hazardous waste from the chemical industry, it becomes then a product. And on that basis, they can put it into the drinking water. These industrial-grade chemicals contain many pollutants, and one of them, usually present in most of the batches that are tested, is arsenic. Arsenic is a known human carcinogen, and at least from the point of view of the US EPA, there is no safe level for a human carcinogen. That means that inevitably, by using these industrial-grade chemicals to fluoridate the water, you are increasing the cancer rates in New Zealand. We can argue about how much, or how big, or how small this increase is, but what they cannot deny is there will be an increase because arsenic is a known human carcinogen with no safe level. And that's over and above the possibility that fluoride itself causes cancer. Now, the proponents claim that they're merely adjusting the levels of a naturally occurring element. Well, is anybody talking about adjusting the levels of naturally occurring arsenic? Just because something occurs naturally does not make it safe. Arsenic is not safe, fluoride is not safe. But as far as nature is concerned, we have a very good indicator of what nature thinks is safe. Safe for a newborn baby. The level in mother's milk is extremely small. It's 0.004 parts per million. Now, the average level that you fluoridate in New Zealand is 0.85. So you are giving, if you bottle feed your baby and you use tap water, you're giving your baby 200 times more fluoride than a breastfed baby, or put it another way, 200 times more fluoride than nature intended for the baby. Now, who knows more about what the baby needs? Nature, after experimenting for thousands or millions of years with evolution, or a bunch of dentists in Chicago. I put my money on Mother Nature. So in New Zealand, you fluoridate between 0.7 and 1 parts per million fluoride. The average is 0.85. That's 200 times the level in mother's milk. To put that another way, it's 20,000% higher than a breastfed baby. In my view, that's irresponsible and reckless. Once you know that, it's irresponsible and reckless for a pediatrician to stand by and let this happen. The water fluoridation, they say, the proponents claim that water fluoridation is not medication. But the definition of medicine, of a medicine, is a substance used to treat a disease. And we are using this substance to treat or prevent dental decay. So clearly fluoride is a medicine, and fluoridation is mass medication. It's a poor medical practice. In the United States, the US Food and Drug Administration has never, after 68 years, has never regulated fluoride for ingestion. It's neither regulated fluoride pills nor fluoride in water. And its official classification of fluoride, and it took us some time to get this in writing, is that it's an unapproved drug. Well, think of that. We have an unapproved, the most prescribed medication in US history, going to more people, over 200 people, million people every day in their drinking water, and it's never been regulated by the FDA, never been approved by the FDA. And as a result, there have never been randomized clinical trials to demonstrate either the effectiveness or safety of fluoridation. None. Nor, as what would happen with any other drug regulated by the FDA, what do? If a drug goes on the market, they collect all the side effects. They collect reports from patients and from doctors about what this drug is doing to them. And they don't dismiss all that as anecdotal information. They collect all this data. Nothing. The FDA is collecting no data. Our doctors are blind to the health effects. Our regulatory agencies have no idea. Bruce Spittle in New Zealand has written a book called Fluoride Fatigue, and that documents the fact that 1 or 2% of the population is very sensitive to fluoride, experiences symptoms which can be reversed when you remove the fluoride and come back when you get reintroduced to the fluoride. And many people are probably walking around with symptoms, common symptoms, skin rashes, gastrointestinal problems, neurological problems, fatigue, chronic fatigue, have no idea, having been treated with umpteen medicines from doctors uselessly, that this is caused by something as simple as the fluoride in their drinking water. Fluoridation is not ethical. No government has the right to force medication on its people, period. It deprives individuals of their right to informed consent to medication. A local government, your Auckland government, is doing to everyone what no single doctor in Auckland could do to anyone. Let me say that again. The city of Auckland is doing to everyone in Auckland what an individual doctor could do to no one in Auckland. An individual doctor could say, if he went up to you and said, I put something in this glass of water which is going to be good for you, drink it. You say, I don't want to drink it. Drink it. No, I don't want to drink it. Drink it. No, I don't want to drink it. Well, if you don't drink it, don't come back to my office. If he was to use pressure to force you to take a medication like that, he or she could lose their license. This play has been written by Kafka. We're doing this to everybody. In my view, our doctors should be ashamed to allow water fluoridation to take place. This room should be full of doctors here, full of doctors, because doctors are taught about informed consent to medication. If you go to the webpage of the American Medical Association, it very clearly spells out what informed consent to medication is. And I'm assuming that New Zealand doctors also get this training. So how can they stand by and see this violated? Probably because they got friends in the Rotary Club or the Golf Club, dental friends, and they think they're doing their dental colleagues a favor. After all, this is about teeth, right? This is about teeth. So we let the dentist get on with it. No, this is more. We have more tissues in our body than teeth. We have brains, we have bones, we have kidneys, we have endocrine systems. So these doctors should help us get dentistry out of the public water supply and back into the dental office. You want to practice dentistry? Do it in your dental office. Don't practice it with my water, thank you very much. I don't want my dentist in my water. Leave it alone. Excuse me, I'm glad you're here. The evidence of benefit is very, very weak. This is one of the shocks for us. This is one of the shocks. When we wrote this book, we had assumed, I think like most people, that the big arguments would be, is this dangerous? We know it's good. We know it's good for us because the dentists will tell us it's wonderful. But the shock was that when we looked at the literature on the effectiveness of swallowing fluoride, whether or not swallowing fluoride reduces tooth decay, we were amazed how weak the evidence was. And by the way, this is not evidence from anti-fluoridation scientists. The evidence that I'm about to cite comes from their side, pro-fluoridation dentists and pro-fluoridation agencies. And this is what's so funny. If only the dentists had time to read the literature, they would realize that their own literature destroys the validity of this practice. But I'll share that with you now. You can make up your own mind whether I'm exaggerating here or not. First of all, 97%, as you heard from the first presenter, of Western Europe drinks non-fluoridated water. Some started but stopped. So all those countries don't fluoridate. 4 of them fluoridate their salt, but the vast majority neither fluoridate their salt nor their water. But if you look at the tooth decay in 12-year-olds, which is collected by the World Health Organization and published online, if you look at tooth decay in 12-year-olds, you'll see it's coming down as fast in the non-fluoridated countries, which are those top 12 there on the right, as the fluoridated countries. In fact, you can't tell the difference. That is tooth decay in 12-year-olds coming down from the 60s to the present. And if you look at the figures for the present, it's a wash. There is little difference between the tooth decay in children who've grown up in fluoridated countries and or non-fluoridated countries. So there's no evidence there to support the benefits of water fluoridation. If we compare US communities, this was the largest study ever done in the United States. They looked at 39,000 children in 84 communities, and this was sponsored by the National Institute of Dental Research, which is pro-fluoridation. Okay, what did they find? Well, what they looked at was decayed, missing, and filled surfaces. So that you know what we're talking about, the top 6 cutting teeth, the bottom 6 cutting teeth have 4 surfaces, because they don't count the cutting edge as a surface. So 4 surfaces, top 6, bottom 6, and then the chewing surfaces, the rest of the teeth, they have 5 surfaces. Altogether, by the time that all the teeth have come out, all the permanent teeth have come out, there's 128 tooth surfaces. But if you look at the average tooth decay for 5 to 17-year-olds, for children who've always lived in a fluoridated community in the United States, the average is 2.8 decayed, missing, and filled surfaces. If you look at the same for non-fluoridated children who'd always lived in a non-fluoridated area, it was 3.4. And if you subtract one from the other, we're looking at the average saving in tooth decay of 0.6 of one tooth surface out of about 100 tooth surfaces. By the time they've all come out, it may be up to just over 1 tooth surface. But this is what all the risks are for. You're going to talk about the health effects in a moment, but apparently we're doing it for this 0.6. But wait a moment. There's something strange about this paper. Even though it was a government-supported research at a highest level, they didn't report the statistical significance. They didn't demonstrate that this 0.6 saving of one tooth surface was actually statistically significant. And when Kathleen Thiessen, a member of the National Research Council panel that reviewed this subject, when she looked at the statistics, it was not statistically significant. Now, if we try to say stop fluoridation because of this amazing result, and we produced a finding comparable to this, and then said it was not statistically significant, they would just laugh us out of court. In fact, they have. There's a Chinese study on hip fractures in which there's a doubling of hip fractures at 1.5 parts per million. But all the pro-fluoridation people ignore that data point because it's not statistically significant. And that's about a serious thing like a hip fracture. All right, let's go on. Studies in Australia have found even less saving than 0.6. These Spencer and co-workers reported a saving of between 0.12 and 0.3. Spencer is one of the leading proponents of fluoridation in the world. He's funded by Colgate and is from the Adelaide University. But they could only find between 0.12 and 0.3. And Spencer, again, doing a study in South Australia with about 10,000 kids, found no statistically significant difference in the permanent teeth between children who drank fluoridated all their water all their lives or bottled water or tank water. No difference. And yet these two both went on to recommend that they fluoridate bottled water. The story of two relationships. We look at the first relationship is fluoride in water and a condition called dental fluorosis. Now, dental fluorosis is a mottling of the teeth. It's a well-known biomarker of overexposure to fluoride before your permanent teeth have come out. It's a systemic effect. It's fluoride interfering with the growing tooth cells, interfering with the enamel. So, very mild dental fluorosis has little white specks on the cusp of the teeth at one end of the spectrum, and then this is at the other end of the spectrum, where up to 25% of the tooth surface has this patchy, chalky appearance. And with time, that can get discolored, go yellow, orange, brown, and so on. Now, mild dental fluorosis, notice the terminology mild, is up to 50% of the tooth surface impacted. And moderate or severe is 100% of the tooth surface impacted, with indentations and with the severe crumbling, brittleness as well. Now, we're going to look at that same database from the National Institute of Dental Research that I've already talked about. And over here is the level of fluoride in the water, that left-hand column, less than 0.3, between 0.3 and 0.7 parts per million, 0.7 to 1.2, and greater than 1.2. Now then, look at the prevalence of dental fluorosis. This is for thousands of children in the United States, 39,000 children. And see how the prevalence of dental fluorosis goes up with the increased concentration of fluoride in the water. 14.6, 19.6, 25.2, 40.5. There is a very clear relationship between the amount of fluoride in the water and this condition called dental fluorosis. Now let's look at the same concentrations in the water and look at the children. This is fluoride in water with dental caries. The central column in green. Less than 0.3, 55.5. This is children with caries. 0.3 to 0.7, 54.6. 0.7 to 1.2, that's artificial fluoridation, 54.4. Greater than 1.2, 56.4. There is not a clear relationship between fluoride in the water and dental caries. There's a strong relationship with dental fluorosis. This is a review, a quote from a review by David Locker from the University of Toronto. He did it for the Ontario government. He wrote, "The magnitude of fluoridation's effect," he means benefit, "is not large in absolute terms, is often not statistically significant, and may not be of clinical significance." Now I want to talk about the Queensland scam. You've seen the data. Now I want to look at the scam, the politics. In 2006, the current Premier of Queensland resigned, and a new Premier was appointed, Anna Bligh. And one of the first things she did when she came into office was to instigate mandatory fluoridation for the whole of Queensland, even though communities in Queensland had fought and fought and fought to keep fluoridation out of their communities, particularly Brisbane. But in one stroke, with a built-in majority in Parliament, she got mandatory fluoridation in. Now this is what the Queenslanders, the citizens, were told by their government. Queenslanders were told that fluoridated Townsville has 65% less tooth decay than non-fluoridated Brisbane. Now you might be wondering what they mean by 65% less tooth decay. Sounds big, doesn't it? 65% less tooth decay? All right, let's have a look at the table from which this was taken. This is by the way, they ran full-page ads. Full-page ads. This glass of water could protect your smile. In Townsville, water supplies have been fluoridated since 1964, resulting in 65% less tooth decay in children than those in Brisbane. Here's the paper. Here are the statistics. And you notice that they've selected 1 year only, 7-year-olds. Tooth decay, decayed, missing, and filled surfaces in Townsville, fluoridated, 0.09. Tooth decay in Brisbane, 0.26 DMFS. This is just for 7-year-olds. That is a 65% difference. But notice that the absolute saving here is 0.17 of a tooth surface. Now imagine they were running full-page ads in Queensland saying if we fluoridate Queensland, we're going to save 0.17 of a tooth surface. Do you think people would have been impressed with that? I don't think so. But the arithmetic is correct. This is how they do it. You subtract 0.09 from 0.26. That's 0.17. You divide by the tooth decay in Brisbane, which is 0.26. You multiply it by 100, and that's 65% fewer tooth surfaces decayed. But again, the absolute saving is 0.17. But it's worse than that. This is an absolutely outrageous example of cherry picking the data. Supposing they had looked at 9-year-olds. Look over here, for 9-year-olds, it's 0.41 in Townsville, it's 0.51 in Brisbane. The difference is 0.1 of a tooth surface, and now the percentage difference is 20%. So it's the vagaries of comparing these small numbers arbitrarily selected. Even more blatant. This is what teeth look like if they're exposed to fluoridated water. This is what teeth apparently look like if they're exposed to non-fluoridated water. Now this is so incredibly crude. It's Orwellian. It really is. Do you think the difference between those two sets of teeth is 0.17 of a tooth surface? No, this is blatant propaganda. Absolute blatant propaganda. And this is not coming from industry. This is coming from tax-paid civil servants. And let's get one thing clear. Civil servants should not be spinning the literature. Civil servants should be presenting to decision makers objective analysis. A balance, a careful balance of the science, both sides. It's the decision maker. If there's going to be any spin, it should be from politicians, because everybody knows that politicians spin everything. But we're paying civil servants for something different. They get large salaries. And I think it's time that we created a fuss. All the attention is on politicians. Politicians are corrupt. Politicians are lying. But underneath these politicians are these slime, these faceless people who are manipulating, for whatever reasons, manipulating science to serve a political agenda. That's not their job. Let's look at the New Zealand scam, because we're going to see that the launching of fluoridation in New Zealand was fraud. The Hastings-Napier trial, which launched fluoridation in New Zealand, started in '54 and ended in '64. Now here's a letter written by the Director of the Division of Dental Health. No one is more conscious than I am of the need for proof of the value of fluoridation in terms of reduced treatment. It is something which has been concerning me for a long time. It's only a matter of time before I will be asked questions, and I must have an answer with meaning to a layman, or I am going to be embarrassed, and so is everyone else connected with fluoridation. But it is not easy to get. On the contrary, it is proving extremely difficult. Mr. Espy is conferring with Mr. Bock and Mr. Ludwig, and I'm hopeful that in due course they will be able to make a practical suggestion. I will certainly not rest easily until a simple method has been devised to prove the equation fluoridation equals less fillings. Now notice the date. This is 1962, October of 1962. This is 8 years into this famous trial. It's been going on for 8 years by 1962. It's due to end in 2 years. And they're still looking for evidence that fluoridation actually reduces tooth decay, according to this letter. So how did they pull it off? John Cahoon from Auckland found out. He said, before the experiment, they had filled and classified as decayed teeth with any small catch on the surface before it had penetrated the outer enamel layer. In other words, they were filling indentations, essentially. After the experiment began, they filled and classified as decayed only teeth with cavities which penetrated the outer enamel layer. It's easy to see why a sudden drop in the numbers of decayed and filled teeth occurred. This change in the method of diagnosis was not reported in any of the published accounts of the experiment. In other words, the 60% drop in tooth decay reflected an artifact that they changed the method of diagnosis. They'd already dropped the control city. They dropped Napier within 1 or 2 years of the start of the trial. So what they were left with is comparing tooth decay at the beginning and at the end. And then they changed the diagnosis in the middle. And that is the study which launched fluoridation in New Zealand. Incredible. Based on fraud. Now, studies in New Zealand, Dr. John Cahoon published many papers. Bill Wilson is a colleague of his sitting in the front row, and I've never been more impressed than in a scientist in my life than John Cahoon. He had been the principal officer of Auckland. He had been a councillor of Auckland, and in both positions he avidly promoted fluoridation, and very successfully. So successful, in fact, that in 1980 his bosses sent him on a world tour to collect more evidence that fluoridation worked. He went to Australia, he went to Asia, went to North America, went to Europe. Behind the scenes, to his utter dismay, the researchers were telling him, John, we can't find a difference between tooth decay and fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. He came back crestfallen to New Zealand, and waiting for him on his desk was a report marked confidential. And that report was a survey of tooth decay for the whole of New Zealand. And John went carefully through it, and it essentially found the same thing, that there was little difference in tooth decay between the fluoridated cities in New Zealand and the non-fluoridated cities in New Zealand. If anything, the tooth decay was a little bit better in the non-fluoridated communities than the fluoridated ones. And so this man had the courage, from being an avid promoter of fluoridation to becoming, for the rest of his life, trying to undo the damage that he had done. But just like Robert Oppenheimer, he found that when he was presenting evidence that supported what his masters wanted, he was a hero. But the moment he started presenting information that did not support what his masters wanted, he became the villain. But he steadfastly stuck to this effort. In fact, he was part of the task force that went to Lord Mayor of Brisbane, made a task force. He was on that task force, and John was able to persuade even the pro-fluoridation people on that task force to oppose fluoridation. Okay, so run the clock forward, and Betty DeLeefter in 1998 described the difference in tooth decay in the permanent teeth between fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities in New Zealand as clinically meaningless. And there's been a very important study from Iowa. This is the famous Iowa study, where a huge amount of US government money is going to studying children's teeth from the moment they're born through. And this was a study of children from 0 to 9 years. And what they did in this study, what no one else has done hitherto, they actually measured the amount of fluoride the kids were ingesting. Not whether they lived in a fluoridated community or non-fluoridated community, but actually how much fluoride they were ingesting. And they found no relation between tooth decay and the amount of fluoride swallowed, ingested. This is what they actually said in their conclusion. These findings suggest that achieving a caries-free status may have relatively little to do with fluoride intake, while fluorosis is clearly more dependent on fluoride intake. One of the things they set out to do was to define the optimal level of fluoride that you needed to fight tooth decay. They couldn't do it. They could not define what an optimal level of fluoride was from this experiment. Now, I presented this paper last time I was here in April, I think, of 2011. And after I'd left, Dr. Robin Wyman, who's the chief spokesman for the pro-fluoridation movement in New Zealand, and prepared a response to my presentation for the National Fluoridation Information Service. This is the propaganda machinery set up by the Ministry of Health to push fluoridation throughout New Zealand and defend it from attacks like mine. And this is what he said. Professor Connett's highlighting of the conclusion from Warren et al. 2009 that there was no relationship between fluoride ingested and tooth decay levels is unsurprising. It is generally accepted that the principle carries protective effect from fluoride is topical. Precisely, Dr. Wyman, precisely. Swallowing fluoride doesn't do any good. Fluoride works on the surface of the teeth. I'm glad you recognize that, Dr. Wyman, but shouldn't that be the reason why you stop putting fluoride in the drinking water and focus on topical applications? If the benefit is topical, even the promoters of fluoridation, not just Robin Wyman, but the Center for Disease Control in the United States, have admitted that the predominant beneficial action of fluoride is topical, not systemic. In other words, it works on the outside of the tooth enamel, not from inside the body. So why swallow fluoride and expose every tissue in the body to a known toxic substance when you can brush it on and spit it out? Can we leave the questions to the end, because I'm frightened it will use up too much time. And why put it in the drinking water and force it on people that don't want it? By using universally available fluoridated toothpaste, you avoid the medical issues and the ethical problems of not forcing it on people. When the CDC admitted in 1999 that the predominant benefit of fluoride was topical, it should have ended fluoridation there and then. And at this point, you can see the difference between science and politics. The science says it's stupid to continue, but the politics says keep going, keep crossing the big muddy, the big fool says push on. I'm quoting a Pete Seeger song about Vietnam. This is what Arvid Carlson said about the revelation that the benefits are topical. Arvid Carlson is the scientist who led the successful campaign against fluoridation in Sweden in the 1970s. He says, in pharmacology, if the effect is local, i.e. topical, it's awkward to use it in any other way than as a local treatment, as a topical treatment. I mean, this is obvious. You have the teeth there, they're available for you. Why drink the stuff? So now then we have to see the other side of the coin. Well, first of all, if it's not doing any good, if swallowing fluoride doesn't reduce tooth decay, that should be the end of the story. If it doesn't work, why do it? Okay, so now we move on to the other issue, which is, and let me make this quite clear, there is no argument that fluoride damages health, okay? Fluoride has wrecked the lives of literally millions of people in India and China, parts of Africa, and other countries which have high natural levels of fluoride in their drinking water, who cook with coal, who drink a lot of brick tea, and so on. So we know that fluoride wrecks bones and causes harm to other tissues. That argument should not be going on at this moment. The real argument is, will people be exposed to doses of fluoride in fluoridated communities from water and from other sources where the combination puts them close to the doses which cause harm? Is there an adequate margin of safety between the doses which cause harm and the doses that people get sufficient to protect everybody, not the average person. Because if you do something as stupid as putting a toxic substance into the drinking water of every man, woman, and child in your community, it's beholden on you to be certain that you're protecting everyone. And that becomes tough, because now you have to protect people with poor kidney function, poor diet, who are sick. You need actually quite a large margin of safety to make sure that you've taken into account all the genetic variations, all the variations in lifestyle, health, and diet of a whole population. So we'll look at this now. Let's look at this. First of all, the harmful effects of fluoride have been carefully documented in a 507-page report by the United States National Research Council, published in 2006. This took them 3.5 years. It's the most comprehensive document, and it is revealing that the promoting health agencies in the fluoridating countries have largely ignored this report. And that goes for New Zealand, it goes for Australia, and it goes for the United States, it goes for Canada. But they looked at the harmful effects of fluoride, including dental fluorosis, brain damage, lowered thyroid function, accumulation in the pineal gland, bone damage, osteosarcoma, mixed studies there. And some people have very sensitive to very low levels of fluoride. They examined that as well. They examined other issues, but there was a lot of big health issues that they examined. Dental fluorosis. This is the easy one. This is the one they don't even bother to deny. They thought at 1 part per million that they could limit dental fluorosis to 10% of children in its very mild form. Remember, that's up to 25% of the tooth enamel. In 2010, the CDC reported that 41% of American children aged 12 to 15 have dental fluorosis. 28.5% have very mild, 8.6% have mild, and 3.6% have moderate or severe. And Black and Hispanic children have higher rates of dental fluorosis. New Zealand dental fluorosis rates, there's very little data that's been published in New Zealand, but for what we can see, it's about 30%. It's about 30% in fluoridated communities and about 15% in non-fluoridated communities. 30% is 3 times higher than the original pioneers of fluoridation anticipated. Now, the real issue is this. When fluoride is damaging the growing tooth cells in the baby, causing this condition, what is it doing to the other tissues? This is what Arvid Carlson again said in 1978. He said, one wonders what an increase in the exposure to fluoride, such as occurs in bottle-fed infants, may mean for the development of the brain. He's a neuropharmacologist, so he's interested in the brain. And that statement was made in 1978. The first animal study didn't come along till about 1995. And the first IQ study didn't come along until 1991, so it was pretty prophetic, his concerns. So let's look at the evidence that fluoride damages the brain. According to the National Research Council, they said it is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain. Many more studies on the brain have been published since 2006, since that review. The review itself only looked at 5 IQ studies. There have now been, as of last month, 36 published studies, courtesy of my son Michael, who's translated many of the Chinese studies into English. The one I'm particularly fond of is this study by Zhang, because I had the opportunity to go to China and visit these villages where this study was done. One village had less than 0.7 parts per million in their well water. The other village had between 2.5 and 4.5 parts per million. Those are the 2 villages. Now, going to the village, these villages, this is from an area of China which has been stable for literally centuries. Practically no movement, no migration. The people all have the same occupation. They're all rural farmers. They all have the same diet. They all have the same lifestyle. All have the same schooling. So everything looks the same except for the fluoride levels in the well water. They even controlled for lead exposure and for iodine intake, both of which would be serious confounding variables, but they were the same. And he found a drop of between 5 and 10 IQ points across the whole age range, and the whole IQ curve was shifted over for both males and females. Here's the males. The black line is the low fluoride village. The dotted mauve line is the high fluoride village. And Zhang estimated that the IQ was lowered at 1.9 parts per million. By putting all the data in, he extrapolated and found that the point at which the lowering would just occur was 1.9 parts per million. And this is why I say there is no adequate margin of safety to protect against known harmful effects, because 1.9 parts per million does not offer an adequate margin of safety to protect all of New Zealand's children from two things. One, the range of doses that you're going to get, and two, the range of sensitivity that you can expect across the whole population. And in this case, the study group, remember, is pretty homogeneous. They're all Chinese, probably fairly uniform genetic stock. So quite tight. But in New Zealand, you've got many different ethnic groups, many different lifestyles, etc., etc., etc. So let's see, does it protect against a range of doses? Of course it doesn't. A child drinking 2 liters of water at 1 part per million will get a dose of 2 milligrams per day. 1 part per million is 1 milligram per liter. So if you drink 2 liters, you're going to get 2 milligrams per day dose. A child in the Chinese study that drank 1 liter of water at 1.9, where the IQ was lowered, would get 1.9 milligrams per day, a lower dose. So you can see that if you had two populations, one drinking, if you like, 0.85, the average for New Zealand, and another community or study group, average 1.9 parts per million, you're going to get an overlap of the doses. So there's no protection against the range of doses here. What about to protect the most? We'd have to protect the most sensitive person in a large population. And we normally divide the dose that causes harm, the lowest dose that causes harm, we divide by 10 to get a dose that we think would protect everybody. May not be enough. If there's any argument, it may not be enough, the 10. But if we assume, this is rather crude because I don't want to mess around trying to work out how much water the Chinese children drink, how much water the New Zealand children drink. So I'm going to assume that both populations drink about the same amount of water each day, in which case we can deal with the concentration. So if I take the 1.9 parts per million and divide by 10, I get to 0.19 parts per million. Your average is 0.85. That means you are exposing your children at 4 times the level that is safe for the most sensitive child in New Zealand. That should be the end of fluoridation right there. If regulatory agencies did the standard risk assessment for toxic substances. Now, since that data was published, since I've been here, Harvard University has done a meta-analysis of 27 of the studies. The methodology in all 27 studies was the same as the Zhang study. They compared the IQ of children in a low fluoride village with a high fluoride village. And the study was published in the Environmental Health Perspectives. That's important because the Environmental Health Perspectives is probably the best journal on environmental health in the world. And number 2, it's published by the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, which is part of the National Institutes of Health in the United States, which in turn is part of the Department of Health and Human Services, which has a policy of promoting fluoridation. So those who are promoting fluoridation at the highest levels in the United States have under their noses proof that fluoride can lower IQ. Now, of the 27 studies they looked at, 26 had a lowering of IQ in the high fluoride village. That's a remarkable consistency, considering that these studies came from all over China. They weren't located in one specific place. They weren't all done by the same authors. They were done by different authors in different places. A remarkable consistency. The people that promote fluoridation say these studies are not relevant because they looked at very high concentrations. Again, they cherry pick. They cherry pick the highest concentration in 2 of the villages, which was 11 parts per million. But they forget something. If you're a regulator, it's not the highest concentration or the highest dose that you're concerned about. It's the lowest dose that causes harm. So to refer to 2 studies where the concentration went up to 11 parts per million is totally irrelevant. It's the lowest doses that you're concerned about. But anyway, 9 of the 27 studies had the high fluoride village had levels of fluoride less than 3 parts per million. Now, they found about a 7 IQ, the average drop was 7 IQ points, and they felt that this deserved high research priority. But fluoridated countries like New Zealand are not doing these or any other health studies. There's no indication that they're going to change, that they're going to suddenly start doing the health studies they should have done 50 or 60 years ago. So there's been no IQ study done in New Zealand, in Australia, in Israel, in Ireland, in Canada, in the United States, or England. Just none. Now, the National Research Council said the same thing in 2006. This needs to be studied. We need to study the IQ in fluoridated communities. No studies done in the 7 years. Now, what they do is assume that the absence of study is the same as the absence of harm. How many people have you heard they say, oh, well, we've been doing this for 50 years. If there was any problem with fluoridation, we would see it by now. Oh, no, you wouldn't, unless you did careful study. How would you know if the arthritis that's increasing in this country is related to fluoride if you're not studying it? How do you know if hypothyroidism that's increasing in this country is not related to fluoridation if you're not studying it? And how do you know there's no effect on IQ if you're not studying it? And we could go on and on and on. If you don't look, you don't find. Here's a somewhat humorous example. This is from Canada. You get an idea of how good the research is in Canada. Dr. Peter Cooney, the Chief Dental Officer of Canada, told an audience in Dryden, Ontario, I was there. I challenged him to debate, but he wouldn't debate. But they snuck him in the day before to poison the water, literally. They were going to have a referendum a few weeks later. And he told them, I walked down your high street today and I didn't see anyone growing horns. And you have been fluoridated for 40 years. And so now we know what the health program is in Health Canada. They go around looking to see if they see any horns, moose horns, deer horns, goat horns, bull horns, cow horns. And having not found any horns growing on any Canadian citizen, they have declared that fluoridation is safe and effective. This is the total, as far as I can see, of the health studies in Canada. Now, what they do, instead of health studies, what they do is reviews of the literature. So Health Canada did a review of the literature, and they selected 6 experts to review the literature. 4 of the 6 were dentists who were known to be pro-fluoridation. And they reviewed the literature on safety. Incredible. 4 pro-fluoridation dentists out of 6 people reviewed the safety of fluoridation. And when it came to IQ studies, they said the weight of evidence indicates there's no significant effect of fluoride on IQ. Where is the weight of evidence? They didn't cite a single study that had not found this relationship. This is very bad science. and very bad science has been the name of the game since 1950 as far as fluoridation is concerned. In 1950, the US government endorsed fluoridation. Not one single trial had been completed, and no health studies of any significance had been published. So it was political then, and it's political today. And one of the reasons they don't do the studies is they don't want to find harm, because they don't want to threaten this policy. Something that is driving this policy has nothing to do with teeth, and certainly nothing to do with protecting our health. And what it is, I'm not sure. But one thing that we're certain is that dentists have controlled this debate for far too long. That's how they see us. We're a great big mouth with little legs on it. The only tissue that they're concerned about are teeth, 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 and teeth. And so we get study after study after study on teeth. And where are the studies on the bone? Where are the studies on the brain? Where are the studies and so on. Okay. This is what Philip Grandjean said about this study, this Harvard. By the way, Philip Grandjean is a world-famous epidemiologist, particularly famous for his work on mercury. He said, fluoride seems to fit in with lead, mercury, and other poisons that cause chemical brain drain. The effect of each toxicant may seem small, but the combined damage on a population scale may be serious, can be serious, especially because the brain power of the next generation is crucial to all of us. So I want to illustrate what he's saying now with these simple diagrams. This is what we call the bell-shaped curve. Every human trait is normally distributed. It goes through this shape, which means that the average person has the average height, the average weight, the average IQ. But you're going to get extremes, the both tails. Now, in terms of IQ, the two tails, the extremes, are children above an IQ of about 130 are very bright or geniuses, right? And the area under the curve, that green area, represents the total number of people in a population which is in that category, very bright or genius. The people in that mauve area, unfortunately, are the mentally handicapped. They're less IQ of less than 70. Now, see what happens when we shift the curve over by 5 IQ points. The average person goes from 100 to 95. That's not noticeable. You're going to not notice that walking down the street. A parent's not going to notice the difference between two siblings, 195, nor is a school teacher. But what I want you to look at carefully now is what that shift, that small shift in IQ, does to the two tails. It halves the number of geniuses in your society, and it doubles the number of mentally handicapped. This has huge social and economic ramifications for any society, any population, especially in the world coming up, where having an intelligent population is going to be very crucial. Any public health official who is presented with these IQ studies and does not do everything in his power to avoid exposure of our babies to neurotoxins should not be in that job. And when you've got something as simple to decide as being able to solve the massive exposure to a neurotoxin simply by turning off a tap, and when you know that communities that have done this have no difference in tooth decay, the very reason that we're doing it, and also you know that the more rational application of fluoride via fluoridated toothpaste is readily and universally available, it takes something which is stupid to something which borders on the criminal. Really. The meta-analysis done by Harvard mentions this study, but it doesn't fit into their meta-analysis because they did a different type of study. They didn't compare low fluoride and high fluoride villages. They simply found out, looked at the IQ of children who were drinking water between about 0.3 and 3 parts per million. That overlaps the range that you use in New Zealand. 0.7 to 1, 0.3 to 3. And what they concluded was that overall, our studies suggested that low levels of fluoride exposure in drinking water had negative effects on children's intelligence. And this is what they did. They found that the higher the level of fluoride in the urine, they measured the fluoride levels in the urine. And that measure is an indirect measure of how much the kids were getting on a daily basis. The higher the fluoride intake, the higher the fluoride in the urine. It's about a 2-to-1 ratio, because we get rid of about 50% of the fluoride through our kidneys. The 50%, it goes into the bones, and what we measure in the urine, I guess, is what does not go into the bone. Anyway, they found the higher the level of fluoride in the urine, meaning the higher the exposure to fluoride in that range, the lower the IQ. And they got that very strong correlation there. The bottom axis is the level of fluoride in the urine. The higher the level of fluoride in the urine, the lower the IQ. A very important study in my view. I don't have time to go through all the other health issues, but we go through them in a series of chapters in this book. So the tricky question of why the Ministry of Health and the local DHBs continue to promote fluoridation. We have to look at this at the 3 levels of bureaucracies. At the bottom, in the middle, and at the top of the bureaucracies, or if you like, you could rephrase it another way, the chain of command. The chain of command that stretches from the Ministry of Health down to local doctors, or the New Zealand Dental Association down to your local dentist. Now, at the bottom of the chain of command, we have thousands of dentists who truly believe that fluoridation works. This is all dentists were taught at dental school, and now you've only got one dental school in New Zealand, in Dunedin. Now most are so busy treating patients that they don't really have time to read the literature. Now the 3 of us retired professors, we had a lot of time to read all the literature that we could possibly get our hands on. So they're very vulnerable. They're very vulnerable then to taking shortcuts, believing what their professional bodies tell them, believing them what consultants organized by the government tell them. And there's a problem here. And the problem is illustrated here from the American Dental Association, which wouldn't know the difference between a bicycle and science. Here's what they say in a white paper in 1979. Individual dentists must be convinced that they need not be familiar with scientific reports of laboratory and field investigations on fluoridation to be effective participants in the promotion program, and that non-participation is overt neglect of professional responsibility. Can you imagine any other profession saying that to its membership? Can you imagine engineers saying, you don't really have to be an expert on the safety of bridges to support this bridge over here? And if you don't support it, you're neglecting your professional responsibility. So obviously, this is a pretty sick state of affairs in this profession. Now, in the middle of the chain of command, bureaucrats are taught very early on not to challenge policy. Policy is established up there somewhere. A policy is established in the center. In the case of health, policy is determined by the Ministry of Health in Wellington. And if you're working for the District Health Board, your job is to promote that policy. And I would venture to say that if a member of the District Health Board went to any community in New Zealand and said that fluoridation was a bad idea, they would be fired tomorrow. I haven't seen anybody disagree with me on that. They are simply obeying orders. It's a frightening thing, and hats off to any bureaucrat that breaks out of this system. When they do so, they usually threaten their pension, their jobs, and everything else. And we have examples of that, by the way. So what we have to be concerned about then, because the middle is not going to do much. The bottom is not going to do much. So what about the people at the top? What's their spin on all of this? Their major concern about fluoridation is losing credibility. For them, to lose fluoridation is to lose credibility. They've been promoting this for years and years and years. They've told us that it's the best thing that they've done. They've told us that the people opposed to this are a bunch of Looney Tunes, and so on. So if they suddenly turn around and say we were wrong, they will lose their credibility. And they feel, I believe, that if they lose their credibility, this is going to threaten other public health policies. Now, this is important because fluoridation as a practice isn't worth a hill of beans. It's pathetic. It does not reduce tooth decay. It doesn't work. Tooth decay does not go up when you stop fluoridation. There are other ways of doing it. So why are they expending so much political capital on trying to keep this foolish practice going? I think the answer is they're protecting something else. They are protecting other public health practices. And when you get into those other public practices, they are worth billions. They are worth billions. So fluoridation is like a skirmish out there to delay the day when they have to defend some of these other public health practices.
Like the vaccination program.
Whatever. Another thing to bear in mind, that public health practices require the public's trust. You have to have the trust of the public. That's why they're very reluctant to say it may work. Everything is completely definite. It's definitely safe and effective. People opposed to it are crazy. It's definite. They cannot express any doubts if they want the whole public to accept what they're doing. It's a different kind of medicine. Public health medicine is very different from individual medicine when the doctor has a chance to discuss this with the patient. He or she can give you the nuances, can talk honestly about the side effects, and then eventually you can make the decision. But that's not the case with public health policies. My response is that every day health agencies and professional bodies promote and defend fluoridation. They are losing their credibility. Any audience that I get to speak to is going to walk away from here wondering what on earth is happening with the Ministry of Health in New Zealand and what is happening in these district health boards. And so it's going to get worse and worse until they admit that they were wrong, bite that bullet, put it behind them, and then begin to regain the public's trust. This is, I think, the only way forward for them, and we have to hasten that along. So better alternatives. If you want fluoride, use fluoridated toothpaste. 96% of toothpaste sold in New Zealand is fluoridated. Better still, use xylitol toothpaste. Xylitol is a natural sugar that we make in our own bodies every day, about 15 grams of it. It's extracted from pine bark. It's been used in Scandinavia for over 30 years, and also in Japan. It's endorsed by a number of national dental associations. Another thing that we can do is to give free toothbrushes and free toothpaste to low-income families. This is what they're doing in Scotland with good results. Give xylitol mints to kids in school, not chewing gum. One of the problems with xylitol chewing gum is that dogs that eat that chewing gum can be killed. Some dog breeds are very sensitive to xylitol. So it's true. So it's better to give the kids mint and suck them in class. That's what they've been doing in low-income schools in Wichita, Kansas, with some good results. Most of tooth decay is concentrated in low-income families. This cries out for targeted attention, better education, more clinics, but certainly better education. The most distressing tooth decay is baby bottle tooth decay. This is when babies suck on bottles of Coca-Cola, milk, fruit juice for hours on end, go to sleep with it in their mouths, and it rots especially the top teeth down to the gums. It is totally intellectually dishonest for dentists to hold up these pictures of baby bottle tooth decay and use this to say that communities should be fluoridated, because fluoridation does not fight baby bottle tooth decay. We need better education, not fluoridation. Better education, not fluoridation. Now, low-income families need better diet and better dental education. Less sugar, more brushing. Less sugar, more brushing. 1 year before the US government endorsed fluoridation in 1950, mysteriously, 1 year before that, the sugar lobby, the Sugar Research Foundation, which represented 133 sugar interests from cookies to candies to cornflakes, said we need to find a way to reduce tooth decay without reducing sugar consumption. Then they proceeded to put millions of dollars into nutrition departments at prestigious universities in the United States, including Harvard. And professors like Fred Stair, chairman of the nutrition department at Harvard, went around the country and testified in Congress that sugar was nutritious, that Coca-Cola was a nutritious drink, and that fluoridation was the best thing since sliced bread. And he kept up this mantra for years and years and years. So sugar not only, of course, causes tooth decay, but it also causes obesity. So if we're talking about, and I see your hand, please. If we're talking about fighting tooth decay and fighting sugar, then the amount of money that's available, if you combine it with fighting obesity, is very large. Obesity, talking about money being spent, money being spent, the amount of money that's going to be spent on the complications of obesity in the health systems of modern countries is going to absolutely cripple us. So why not take this opportunity to get soft drinks out of schools, educate the kids on better nutrition, make nutrition a core subject in schools, and combine it with toothbrushing, combine it with xylitol, combine it with more exercise. Should be a top priority. I'm going to deal with the questions at the end. A very sad truth is the Maori, who are being singled out for one of the reasons that we have to fluoridate in New Zealand, had perfect teeth before Western diets. There's a whole book that's been written by the Weston Price on this. Indigenous peoples, from Eskimos to Maoris to Aborigines to Pacific Island peoples, had perfect teeth until they got Western diets, where we threw at them refined sugar, refined flour. So now we're adding insult to injury. We've ruined their teeth, and now we're going to poison. Now we're going to give them poison. And it's precisely the Maori community that does not need fluoride because they have a high prevalence of kidney disease. They can't get rid of that fluoride. They have higher rates of diabetes. They don't need fluoride because people with diabetes drink more water. So we need that education. I'll be talking in a marae on Monday in Hamilton. And one of the things I'm going to suggest to them, what were those diets that you had that so impressed Western diet? What were you eating before Western diets? Why not see if you can go back to some of those diets? What's that? It's the one on the university. So how can we end fluoridation in Auckland? Ending fluoridation is as easy as turning off a tap. I've mentioned this, but we need the political will. We need many more people educated, organized. Affecting change is like driving a nail through a piece of wood. The expert, me, can sharpen the nail, and I hope I've sharpened a few nails tonight, but I can't push the nail through the piece of wood. We need the hammer of public opinion to drive that nail home. So now what you should all be thinking about is how can you take the ammunition that I've shared with you tonight and use that to affect change? How can you use that to influence your local dentist, your local doctor, and your local decision makers? That we've got a lot of resources for you to use. FAN New Zealand has an excellent website. And we need to network. We can't do this alone. Right now, there are people all over the country that are drawing tremendous energy from the fact that we're making progress in Queensland, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Every time a community stops fluoridation anywhere in the world, everyone in our network celebrates. Same with New Zealand. Our website is one of the best, fluoridealert.org. Don't forget that health database that my son Michael made. This book is available online, the National Research Council report. You can search it by word. It's easy to use, but it's very dense. To do justice to that, you'd have to spend several months on that. That would be good for doctors and scientists, perhaps. Our book was an attempt to make this information more readily accessible to the public, but without insulting their intelligence. Every fact is documented. But that will take you a few days to a few weeks to master that material, but you would have it. But something that will only take you 29 minutes is there's a videotape on our webpage called Professional Perspectives on Fluoridation. There you'll hear from 15 scientists, 1 Nobel Prize winner, 3 members of the National Research Council that wrote that report, 2 former employees of the US EPA, a couple of dentists that were once pro-fluoridation, now anti-fluoridation, and a few scientists and environmentalists like myself. In 29 minutes, they do a pretty good job. You have our permission to make as many copies of this as you want. And I think if you can get round to it, trying to influence your neighbors, the simplest thing you can do is to give them the videotape, don't get into an argument, ask them to watch it, then talk about it later. Do that with your dentist too. Don't get into an argument and say, you're a dentist or you're a doctor and you're a professional, I'm not. I've watched this videotape and I'm very disturbed by the arguments in here. I'd like you to watch it and then give me your response. Should I be worried or not? So treat them with the greatest respect, but try to encourage them to look at this with an open mind. We have to end fluoridation, one open mind and one community at a time. I'm not anticipating any day soon help from federal governments, the big central health agencies. But I think with people like yourselves, with more and more open minds, and we can win this. Since October 25, when fluoridation met its Waterloo, Ontario, where they voted out fluoridation in a referendum, we've had over 100 communities stop fluoridation in Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. That's about 3 million people liberated worldwide. And there's a listing on our webpage. We keep it up to date. On February the 4th, Windsor, Ontario voted to stop. That was about 300,000 people. February the 5th, Cairns in Queensland voted to stop. On February the 12th, St. Croix Falls in Wisconsin voted to stop. On February the 12th, Bundaberg in Queensland voted not to start. And February the 20th, Fraser Coast in Queensland voted to stop. Hopefully you will add Auckland to this list. One word of warning. Councillors in these communities that you've just seen, when these councillors vote out fluoridation, they immediately are bombarded with a horrible series of ill-informed attacks and criticisms. They're attacked in editorials, they're attacked by the Minister of Health going on television and tell people that they're talking nonsense. I didn't tell you that the good news was that Queensland lifted that mandatory fluoridation. The new Premier lifted the mandate. That's why we're getting these 8 victories in Queensland. So I want to arm the councillors that you're trying to reach. We have to protect them. So tell the critics this. When the critics go after you, Mr. or Mrs. Councillor, for stopping fluoridation, you say there are too many unanswered questions for me to feel comfortable forcing this on citizens against their will. This is what many of the European countries have said. We do not feel comfortable forcing this practice on people that don't want it. A second thing that you can say is, I'm very uneasy that promoters who tell us that fluoridation is safe and effective do not accept any liability if harm is caused. So they're pressuring us to do this or not to stop it, But if anything goes wrong, who are they going to come after? Who are the lawyers going to come after when the lawsuits begin for some of these health effects? It's not going to be the American Dental Association, these other people. It's the people that actually do it, either the water department personnel or the counselors who said yes. And the third thing, which is good protection, is this. Professor Connett raised a lot of powerful arguments with us and in his book. The book is available on Amazon.com. If you disagree with Professor Connett's arguments, are you prepared to debate him during his tour of New Zealand? And none of these people have been prepared to debate me, right? I predict that right now. I won't get a debate. Then you just change it the next time he comes to New Zealand. And the point is that you're trying to make clear a yes or no. It's a one-word answer. Are you prepared to debate him if you know so much? Now, if promoters don't have the courage of their convictions sufficient to defend their opinions in open public debate, why should you or anyone else have any confidence in those convictions? So it's simple, isn't it? It's not my practice. It's not your practice. It's their practice. And if it's their practice, and if they are prepared to put a poisonous substance in the drinking water without control of who gets it, without controlling of dose, with lousy science to support the effectiveness and the fact that it's safe, if they're prepared to do all those things, then they have to be able to defend it. Defend it completely and convincingly and on a public platform against all comers. And if they can't do that, that's the time that we have to insist you stop.